What I'm going to share with you this morning is a set of ideas on this issue of conglomerates that I have been developing with my current PhD student, Dani Bahar, and my former PhD student, Rodrigo Wagner, who's now a professor at Tufts. I see Dani over there. Dani, raise your hand. Okay. So we started to think about the issue of conglomerates, influenced also by the work of Tarun, who has been studying this for a long time, because most people, when they think of conglomerates, they think of these big, ancient, slow, angry-looking animals, right? And they don't necessarily think of these nice-looking little cats, or that we associate with dynamism, economic growth, and so on. And so the question is, when we think about the economic structure of developing countries, how should we think about these conglomerates? So let me start with the bad way to think about them. So here is the essence of conglomerates. Okay, so the bad story about them is to say that conglomerates tend to be companies that concentrate in the domestic market, especially in non-tradable goods and services in the domestic market, so they don't face foreign competition in the domestic market. They take a dominant position in that sheltered domestic market, and once they dominate that, take a significant market share in that industry, in order to grow, they have to move to another industry, and they choose another non-tradable industry, goods and service, sheltered from international competition. And they tend to like to create some barriers to entry, so that even in that domestic market where they have a dominant position, they don't feel too contestable. And they develop cozy relationships with the authorities, right? And that's a story. So this is a story that people tell a lot in Mexico about themselves. So they will say, look at the beverage industry, look at the telecom industry. In fact, the richest man in the world is Carlos Slim. Look at their television system, look at their banking system. It's highly concentrated. These are all non-tradable industries concentrated in the domestic market with a dominant position. So conglomerates, if sort of like the essence of capitalism is these conglomerates, it tends to generate a legitimacy problem for capitalism vis-a-vis the broad society, because it makes capitalism appear as a closed game with few players and exorbitant privileges for those that are at the top, rather than as an open system that encourages entrepreneurship, startups, opportunity, etc. So that's the bad story of conglomerates. So they are monopolies, pyramid schemes that have cozy relations with governments that change the goalposts in their favor. So is this the story? Is this the essential story? And in order to create an alternative story, I have to tell you a little bit about how it is that we think of development, and what is the story of the theory of development that we have been building at the CID for the last decade or so. We call it now the Scrabble theory of economic development, because in this Scrabble theory of economic development, we think of letters as productive capabilities, right? And words are like products. So how do you make products? You make products with letters. You need to if you want to make a product, you need to have the letters that go into the product. You need to have the productive capabilities that go into making that product. So if you have very few letters, say if you have only one letter, you can make one word, right? Now, if I give you three letters, say A, C, and T, you can actually make these three words: at, cat, act, right? But if I give you, say, four letters, you might say you can make four words. Well, no, you can make these 7 words, right? And if I give you 10 letters, you can make 595 words. And not only can you make more words, you can make longer words. Right? So as you increase the number of letters you have, the number of possible combinations of the letters that you have grows combinatorially, grows factorially. Right? And among them, you can make longer words. Okay? So that's our theory of development. And actually, we have estimated this for the world. And in a paper we published in December of last year, we estimated what is a fraction of the alphabet. Think of this as the fraction of the dictionary you can write, given the fraction of the alphabet you have. So this says that, and this is estimated for data for the world. So NAICS is the North American Industrial Classification System, and the SITC is the. So these are data sets for the world. And what this says is that if you have 40% of the letters, you essentially make no products. You make one product or two products. That you only start to diversify when you really have a much larger chunk of the alphabet. So if you wanted to export, say, fresh pineapples, you don't need only a farm that makes pineapples. You need a cold storage transport system. You need food safety standard certification systems. You need to be able to go through customs quickly. You need to have a frequency of travel. So you need to have a set of things that unless you have them all, you cannot write that letter. Right? So that's the sense in which these letters are these productive capabilities that you need to mobilize in order to do things. Now, in the book we published last year, The Atlas of Economic Complexity, we showed this is our best measure of how many letters countries have, and this is how rich they are. And it's an amazing, this theory has an amazing ability not only to predict how rich countries are, but to the extent that you might say that the theory is not perfect, that not everybody is on the regression line, those errors, supposed errors, are in fact very informative of where countries are going. Because this country here is Greece. This says, gee, why is Greece so rich given how little they know? So maybe Greece is not going to be so rich given how little they know. Or why is India so poor given how much they know? Well, maybe India is not going to be so poor because the fact that they have what it takes to make much more than they're currently making suggests that they have what it takes to grow. So actually, these error terms predict future growth. And we have been, we made the point last year that there's a lot in terms of predicting future growth that comes out of this theory. So. So the question is, if I now have uncovered the mystery of development, then why don't countries develop? Why so many countries have been trapped in poverty? Why haven't they all become, the growth miracles of the world? Why is it so difficult to accumulate letters? And the answer we give to this question is this chicken and egg problem. What is the nature of the chicken and egg problem? Well, the problem is that you cannot make watches unless you have the letters that go into making watches. Say you need watchmakers. But you don't want to become a watchmaker in a country that doesn't have a watchmaking industry. Right? So you can't make the industry without the letters, but you don't want to create letters that are used by industries that don't exist. And even if you wanted to become a watchmaker, you wouldn't have other watchmakers to learn from. So where does the first watchmaker come from in a country that doesn't make watches? So when you get for the first time into a new industry, where is the know-how, where are the capabilities that that industry requires? So now I have explained to you why is it that development is difficult. But then the question is, how does it happen when it does happen? And the answer we find is that it happens by countries moving from the things they know how to make to things that are nearby. And what do we mean by nearby? Well, nearby in the sense that you almost have all the letters that it takes, but maybe you're only missing one or two. So the magnitude of this coordination problem, the chicken and egg problem that you need to solve, is more constrained. And that gave rise to our theory of this product space. This product space is a technological connection between products. Here, each product is a circle. Each product is like a tree in this forest. And it's connected to other products that use a similar set of letters. Okay? So that this map tells you what are the transitions that are more feasible. Given the letters you have, given what you know how to do, what could you do next? What would be a path that would minimize on this chicken and egg problem? And that we talked, for those who came last year, we talked about this last year. This is in the Atlas of Economic Complexity and so on. So the process of economic development in this paradigm involves accumulating more letters, expressing them in more words, that is in more products, more industries, more diversity, and in longer words. That means in more complex products, in more complex industries. Okay? So that's the process of economic development. And so let's see, as an example, how it looks in practice. So this is Korea, and this is the evolution of Korea's exports between 1965 and 1970. And you see that Korea's exports, this is raw silk, textiles, silk woven fabrics, unbleached cotton woven fabrics, and so on, okay? So that's what they were making. Those are the words that they could write, given the letters that they had at the time. Now pay close attention, because it took Danny Bahar like an hour and a half or a day and a half to do the following dynamics, okay? So look at this attentively. So that which I saw you there is over here, okay? Sorry. And there was this spectacular growth of a lot of stuff that was not there before. Let me show it to you in this other way. By the way, all these charts are made by our Observatory of Economic Complexity, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more this afternoon. So you might say there's a lot of work to do these charts, but actually the work was to do the observatory. The charts are now easy to do. So this is the composition of Korea's exports. Back in 1965, they were exporting $165 million. Okay? So it's unbleached cotton, clothing, textiles, etc. That's what they were able to do. Seafood, some meat, some vegetables. That's what they were. Those were the letters they could write. Okay, now this is another animation. So this is going to be a video of how this structure changed. You can look at the number up here. This was $165 million. And you can look at the colors. For example, here is steel. This is machinery. These are chemicals over here. Okay, so take a look at the, this is time going up. We are up 10, 12, $26 billion, $55 billion, $200, $400 billion. And microcircuits, cars, etc., chemicals. See, there's a complete transformation of the letters of the words they were able to write, because they must have accumulated a bunch of productive capabilities that were nowhere there in 1965. Now, so now what do business groups have to do with this? What do conglomerates have to do with this? Well, if these are the current exports of Korea, this is what conglomerates have to do with it. This transformation happened within Korea, but it happened within conglomerates in Korea. Okay? So that's what they do. Okay? So this is the dynamic version of how Korea populated the product space that I showed you before. These are here electronics, these are textiles, these are machinery, these are chemicals, and that's how they move to populate the parts of the product space that they currently occupy. Anyway, so wants to do it again for some reason. Okay, so they were in garments, they got into electronics, and now they're getting to this whole machinery cluster and chemicals. Okay, so now let's look at Turkey. And we have Attila Kurama here. So this was Turkey in 1965. They were making raw cotton, edible nuts, some other agricultural products here, dried and shelled stuff, some meat products, some unwrought copper and copper alloys, and that was it. It was $500 million. Okay? So look at the transformation. Now we're at 7 billion, 10 billion, 12 billion. They got into garments. Now look at cars coming up and electronics, and that's where they are now at $124 billion. Okay? And who did this? Well, this is the transformation of their exports, the appearance of a bunch of new industries that were nowhere there before. And in the case of Turkey, you have an impressive number of conglomerates. This is the Koç group. I cannot tell you exactly what all these things are, but this is the Doğuş Grubu group. They're into banking and financial services, automotive, construction, media, tourism, real estate, and energy. So they're highly diversified into a bunch of things. Some of them are these non-traded domestic industries, but others are globally competitive. So here's the Boydak Group: furniture, cable and wire, iron and steel, textiles, chemicals, marketing, logistics, technical services, and so on. And here you have the Kukurova Group: industry, construction, communications, media, transportation, finance, and energy, and so on. And you have the Borusan Group in steel distribution, energy, logistics, and so on. And we have also in our panel Jorge Londoño from the Grupo Empresarial Antioqueño. They started with a chocolate factory, they bought a cement factory, they bought an insurance company, they bought a bank. They were threatened by a hostile takeover, so they decided to create a group to protect management from capital markets and so on. So that's dinosaur-like behavior. But then they started to grow and expand. They became a big holding company in insurance, in cement, in food, and they eventually even got to buy ING's assets in Latin America. So this has become 6.7% of Colombia's GDP, I don't know, almost 100,000 employees and so on. So in a perfect world, the type of world that economists write in their textbooks, every country has all the letters, and entrepreneurs just pick and choose the letters they need, and they write whatever words they want. But in the real world, there are many missing letters, and there are these chicken and egg problems, so doing stuff is difficult. So emerging markets are characterized by many missing markets, many missing inputs, difficult contract enforcement. So it's not, it's a difficult environment in which to make your property rights be protected. An underdeveloped financial system, so it's not that easy to mobilize capital, especially equity, and especially equity for startups, which eventually, new stuff has to start someday. And there's the public inputs in terms of infrastructure, security, and so on, training, education, and so on may not be up to par. And you have a hostile environment for small firms. Many of the small firms have a much higher mortality rate because it's really hard to get going. And in fact, small firms in developing countries tend to be born bigger than equivalent firms in developed countries. You need to have size in order to survive the first few years. So in this context, can business groups, can conglomerates represent a problem or represent a solution? And the hope is, can they solve more easily the chicken and egg problem? And the idea is that they might be able to solve the chicken and egg problem more easily because you can be born within an internal ecosystem provided by the group. So you're not this standalone in the environment out there. You can grow within a nurturing organization that can provide some vertical integration. So maybe they are your customers. Maybe the reason why so many of the groups in Turkey have a logistics activity is because they needed logistics. They developed logistics for themselves, and then they spun off logistics to serve other people. Maybe they needed energy. There wasn't enough energy, so they developed their own energy, and then they spun off to serve other people. So they may solve these chicken and egg problems through vertical integration within the group. They have like an internal capital market. They have cash flows coming from different industries. They can reallocate to other industries. So they can mobilize funds across sectors that cannot be allocated when there are no efficient financial markets out there. They have an internal managerial capacity that once management gets an industry going and more or less it becomes business as usual, there is this potential creative managerial power that can be redeployed for other challenges. They have reputation and goodwill, which makes it easier for them to get contracts, to get suppliers that other people might not be able to mobilize. And they have some capacity to coordinate other businesses around them. So that if you think, for example, of a shopping mall, it's very hard to get a shopping mall going unless you have an anchor store. And once you have the anchor store, then you can put the movies, you can put the food court, you can put the little stores for other things, because the rest of the ecosystem can be built around this anchor store that creates the founding part of that economic structure. So then you can ask yourself the question, well, why do you need national conglomerates if we have multinational companies? Why not multinational companies? And the distinct advantage of national groups over multinational companies is that national groups can decide to diversify domestically in a way that the subsidiary of a multinational group would never do. So if you are in the steel industry, you're not going to, and you're going to invest in country X because you want to produce steel or you need iron ore, you're not going to create a power company, a logistics company, a car company, and so on, because if you're going to diversify, you're going to diversify thinking from your headquarters as to what are the things that you're going to do. So the amount of discretion you allocate to a subsidiary is much smaller than the level of discretion that a national business group can have. So they have more decision power to exploit new emerging opportunities that appear locally. So now I have described an incredible potential for business groups to be really catalytic in the process of development. Can they address this legitimacy problem that capitalism has? Well, national business groups can help countries diversify. And to the extent that diversification is key to the process of development, the process of accumulating new letters, of writing new words, that diversification, that to the extent that they can move the country in that direction, they should get some social kudos, right? Especially when we're talking about exports. Because exports don't have the problem of you being criticized for cornering a sheltered domestic market. In the export market, you're competing with 100 other countries around the world. Exports are not limited by the size of your domestic market. So exports can become things that grow by leaps and bounds. If Samsung was focused on catering to the Korean domestic market, Samsung would be an infinitesimal fraction of what it is today. So if you want to grow to a scale, you eventually have to be able to conquer global markets. And exports also help solve a complicated political problem. If in Boston you hear that the government is adopting policies that help the Yankees and hurt the Red Sox, we are going to organize a revolution here, right? If in Spain there's a perception that the government helps Real Madrid and hurts Barcelona, that's going to be civil war. They have an experience of that already once. Okay, but exports are like the national team. Exports compete with other people out there. While if you're fighting over the domestic market, the politics of fighting over the domestic market make government support intervention much more complicated. So for these three reasons, national companies, national business groups that diversify into exports and that diversify the exports of the country. So it's not the group that is diversifying, by just mergers and acquisitions of other groups. It's the country that is diversifying because the group gets the country into things that were not there before. And so a commitment of the group to help the country win the World Cup in longer words, new words, more complex products, could be an important source of legitimacy for those groups. Okay? So what could business groups do in order to move in this direction? Well, they could adopt targets for diversification, for export, and for jobs. And instead of telling people how much they spend money in corporate social responsibility, which is fine, but it's not their core business, okay, there are targets in terms of how they help transform the economy where they operate, in terms of diversification of exports, generation of new jobs, is an important source of potential legitimacy. And targets on that may communicate more easily what it is that they do. Second, they can operate as having an internal venture capital and incubation process. So to the extent that they need to achieve those targets, they need to create the environment to nurture those new firms that are going to achieve that transformation. And so part of what they are is, what they can become is this internal venture capital and incubation process. Third, they can adopt this David Packard approach. David Packard, as you know from Hewlett-Packard fame, is credited for a lot of what happened in Silicon Valley, because since Hewlett-Packard was this highly innovative company that was thinking of technology and technological applications of things, it was full of engineers that would come up with new ideas for products and stuff. So an engineer would come up with an idea, and the group would say, gee man, we're into printers, or we're into oscilloscopes, or whatever it was, calculators, whatever it was at the time. It doesn't really fit into our business model, but why don't you go ahead, start your own company, maybe we'll help you, and if you don't succeed, come back. Okay? So it creates sort of like a floor to these internal entrepreneurs that are encouraged to go out and try it, and reduces the risk they face. I can perfectly imagine, say in my country, if a major company had a really dynamic manager who comes up with this idea and says, maybe I should start my own company, they would say, gee, don't do that, that would be treason, I'll raise your salary, I'll give you more position, don't leave, right? So the question is, are we nurturing these internal entrepreneurs within the groups to try it out, or are we limiting that ability by this alternative strategy? So, and finally, they could make these commitments public so that what they are held accountable by the society around them is how they really help to move the development ball forward. Thank you very much.